6 o'clock, and we'll call to order the virtual meeting of the Village of Lake Bluff's Finance Committee. It's Monday, June 8th at 6 p.m. Could we have a roll call of everyone in attendance at the meeting? Just the Finance Committee members, Marlene.
Sure. Chair Ankerman?
Here.
Member Meyer?
Here.
Member Toll?
Here.
Okay, great. The first order of business is the approval of the minutes from the May 27th, 2020 meeting. Do we have a motion?
So moved. Second.
And do we have any discussion for corrections or additions to the minutes?
No.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Next we have some time set aside for any non-agenda items and visitors to the meeting. So we allot 15 minutes for anyone who would like the opportunity to address the committee on items that are not listed on the agenda. Glenn, do we have anyone queued up for that?
It does not appear so. So if you're joining us, you can press, as a reminder, you can press *9 if you're on the phone. You can use the Q&A feature at the bottom. We're happy to recognize you, or else we'll carry on with our meeting.
All right. Well, Glenn, let me know if somebody chimes in. Today we're here to continue a discussion regarding the 21-22 revenue and expense modifications in light of the economic situation. We had a presentation a couple of weeks ago on Wednesday from the Finance Committee listing out projections in terms of both revenues and potentially expenses that can be reduced or delayed based on the changes in the projections. And we took some time to equate that to the project list that had been, part of our budgeting process. And we had gotten to a point where we were discussing a number of projects and wanted additional information and quite frankly needed a lot more time to talk about it and think about it. So with that set up, Drew and or Bettina, do you want to share with us a little bit?
I'll start off and I'll turn it over to Bettina if that's all right.
Great.
So the memorandum in the packet talks about the depressed revenue streams and also lines out how the village, before the village ended up borrowing to complete certain water system infrastructure improvements to include the water meter system, the new water meters rather, and replacement of certain water mains and other appurtenances, valves, and so forth. The village had gone down a path where we were going to borrow $400,000, 3 increments of that from the general fund to the water fund, but ultimately the village board chose to bond, and after the village had already we'd already lined over $400,000 into the water fund, and so that money has been sitting there. And Bettina, can you put up that slide?
Sure. Glenn, can I share, please?
Here you go.
Thank you.
So long story short is the village could send back a portion thereof, and that's what, if the Finance Committee wants to take on some of these stormwater projects that have been talked about potentially postponing, and I'm actually going to bring up 2 other stormwater projects in addition to the bath and tennis project, which haven't been discussed in depth of lately. Well, one is a new one, but there is a means to pay for it by repaying the general fund, the $400,000, or again, a portion thereof. And I wanted to show you all that impact on the water fund. And Bettina, you can talk about this if you would, please.
Sure. So in the past, I've shown you the operating expenses, the ending fund balance, and then 25% of target balance. And that's because this is a proprietary fund, a water fund, that to calculate the fund balance, which is a loose term, but anyhow, to calculate the fund balance, you look at those three categories, and you can see that the blue and the orange and the gray kind of have been riding with the projections. And let me also add that the projections do not include any rate increases. So we kept those flat for the purposes of this. So the yellow line I added in new to the projection snapshot, if you will, is net position. And that's what the audit reflects. And that's the actual cash or the amount in the proprietary fund. But we look at operating expenses and the ending fund balances for our target insofar as the financial policy. But the $400,000 transfer is not part of operating, so it doesn't really have a net effect on the operating expenses or the target for the 25% plus 2 years depreciation. So what you look at is the net position, which is the yellow line, which is where that 400,000 would be removed on the statements in the audit, and you can see the decline as you get to the out years. Initially in fiscal years 22, 23, and 24, I left the capital improvements at about 50,000, that being because this coming year, we're actually going to have some of the UMI water meter work done and valve work done, which is bond money, which is also not part of operating. And then in the out years, I reduced it to 100,000 or increased it to 100,000. And then as we talked about in the past years, fiscal year 25 to 29, it's back to 250,000. I would guess that those capital improvement dollars would need to be funded by the general fund.
Or alternatively, the village could increase
Right.
its rates, which is probably what we'd be talking about to do. And
Right.
is that enough to close that gap, Bettina?
I'd have to do a further analysis. I'm not sure. I mean, it would close it somewhat. I don't think it would close it entirely. No.
Yeah. But that does also assume a certain continuing capital expenses. What's that dollar amount?
So 250,000 after fiscal year 24 is the number that is in this particular projection. And like I said, the first 2 years I reduced it because we'd still be dealing with some bond money and residual valves and finishing the meter project.
Okay.
So for us to share this as a possible pathway to increase, or I guess it would be potentially increasing, but maintaining some planned capital initiatives. This is the method that we had hinted at the last meeting and said this is a possible way to pay for it. We wanted to show you the impacts to that enterprise fund, so you had that information as well. And if I could, Chair Inkerman, I'd like to have Jeff review with you all 2 other projects. We talked about in detail the bath and tennis improvement at the last meeting. There's 2 other projects, one of which we've talked about somewhat, and that was a planned expenditure in this year's fiscal plan of $10,000 that we look to hire the village's stormwater consulting engineer, Christopher Burke, to educate the village leadership on the possible implementation of a utility tax to fund stormwater improvements in the near and long term of the village. And Jeff, if you could talk about that a little bit and then roll into the East Terrace overland flow route option, and maybe give the board a little background on that, as well as they've all received the proposal. So from Christopher Burke about that project, which is not identified. It's not an existing project, but it is an potentially alternative solution to a project which the village has drilled down on and produced a general plan to attack. And I'll let Jeff take over from here.
Okay, thanks, Drew. The utility tax potential. So we have the $10,000 in the budget. The idea is they could come give a presentation at the board, just kind of go over how that works, what our potential income is. Maybe some input from Bettina, what you could potentially fund with a utility tax, and some examples of other communities surrounding us that have done this, their different rates that they have, and how they got that to be approved, and essentially what it could pay for. So that is not a big number, $10,000. It's not a huge effort for them, but it would be a presentation, some follow-up information, possibly a second presentation, just to get us all educated as far as what the potential is for a utility, and what the pitfalls might be. So that is a small item in our budget. The other item Drew talked about is the East Terrace after the flooding all May, or at least the second half of May. We all saw that letter from some residents on Pine Court especially, and I think there was some contact from Rockland as well about flooding in the streets and potential damage to properties. The line that I've been talking to a lot of residents in that neighborhood over the years, and we've identified about $5 million worth of improvements that would have to happen to upsize the storm sewers in that subdivision just to get the water to the underpass. And then we've got another 15 million to get to Lake Michigan. So that seems rather far off that we're going to be able to get all those projects completed. So we were looking at any alternate way to alleviate the flooding, and Drew and I and our consultant Scott Griffith and Christopher Burke walked the neighborhood after the last meeting to kind of see if you could put a swale through some side yards to try to direct water street to street, west to east, without it getting too close to property, without it ponding. I think in Pine Court it ponds more than a foot deep when we get rains like we've had, and try to get that water as far east as we can, or to Maumana into the park, without having to spend $5 million on storm sewer pipes. So we have a proposal from Christopher Burke. I think the number is like $22,000. It's not in front of me right now. To do some preliminary effort on that, to just get us to the point where we know, is this going to impact homes? How close to people's homes is it going to be? What is it going to look like through their yards? And what kind of performance can we expect? Can we keep the streets dry and passable for a 10-year storm? Can we keep water out of houses in a 100-year storm like our criteria says we will? And if you do this, what will be the impacts on other properties as we route this water in a different way? Right now on Pine Court, it just sits and it fills Pine Court. Eventually it tips over and goes down to Lincoln, but it goes slowly. It's almost like Pine Court is used as a detention pond when it rains, and it holds water. So if we were to drain that in a different way and run it over land, what impact would that have on other properties? And we can build on the model we've done over the past 2 years in our village-wide stormwater plan. And that's kind of the beauty of having that model, is now we can do some hypotheticals and do some studies without having to spend a whole lot of money on each individual study, because we have the base product already. So the proposal that they sent over will essentially check how we can meet our criteria and what is in the way of putting the swale through backyards. It's something that we can get to a point where if we want to, we can go to property owners and say, this is what we can offer to do as a project to alleviate the flooding, because it is going to have an impact on their property. So we'd like to show the size and impact on their property and the benefit in the reduction of flooding.
So now that we've invested in this model, when we say that we can then utilize it, is it that we have to hire Christopher Burke to run through all the analyses and various scenarios, or are we in-house able to do that type of work?
We don't have to hire Christopher Burke, but we don't have the software license to run it in-house. We could carry it to another consultant if we were dissatisfied with their work.
Mm-hmm.
But the license for that, I think, is in the neighborhood of $7,000 to $10,000 a year. Mm-hmm. And I used to run that program several years ago, but I don't think I'd be as efficient as they are or another consultant.
Right. And the other thing I wanted to understand, or that I wanted to talk about, was when we look at alternatives for stormwater fees of some sort, and the work that would be done, about $10,000 or so to, break some of that down compared to other municipalities. That's a revenue generating activity in the end. And I don't know what the payback would be if within the year, then we were able to, create a model that would work for our municipality and then implement it. I don't know what that, the return on what we've invested would be, if that would be something that would turn around quickly or not. But it certainly would help to provide a stream of income for the numerous and varied stormwater projects and issues that we have in the village. So when it comes to that smaller item of about 10K, do you have any thoughts about that?
I don't think it's realistic that we would implement the utility and start collecting revenues this fiscal year. I think at least best case would be sometime in the next fiscal year.
And we have no idea of really what that might generate in terms of fees for the village at this point.
There is a wide range of fees that people collect based on their need. I think we did a real back of the napkin calculation with one of the lower end fees of other communities. We figured maybe $500,000 a year at that rate. And again, the rates vary widely, so it's going to depend on how many projects we want to do and what we feel like we can put out there as a rate.
Well, I definitely think we need to have a study to see how that would work. And I don't know if you fund it based on this is the type of use that we see residents are, based on the number of square feet that they own, that's a certain amount of coverage of stormwater, and that's how the fee's based, or if you base it on saying we have a project of X number of dollars and we have Y number of residents, and then we just divide it out and it needs to happen over a certain period of time. I don't know how that model works, but I guess the point is that that funding for this project would actually be something that would in the end generate fees so that we could fund the projects. And I wanted to know how other board and committee members felt about, if I'm missing something or there are other concerns.
I think stormwater is, of course, a priority for everyone right now. Every North Shore community is dealing with stormwater in their own way. And I think whatever we can do to accelerate any projects that we have and fix any problems that we know about and any that come up, I think we need to find ways to do it. So if that means a utility tax for stormwater, I'd certainly be willing to explore that option.
And Barbara, I'm in agreement with Aaron. Certainly, I think a cornerstone of our stewardship in Lake Bluff has to be to deal with the stormwater issues. The projects that we have at hand before us today, I think, are certainly worthy projects. One of them is even has the potential of revenue generation, as you've rightly pointed out. So I'm certainly in favor of proceeding with the three things that we have at hand today and going deeper so we'll get more information on what we can do going forward to deal with the water. It's a critical issue for us.
Well, we've got three items at three very, very different costs. We've talked about the initial work to analyze what a fee might look like. We've looked at the further modeling of the West Terrace to see if there's some overland solution at about 23K. And then there's the large bath and tennis project at 270,000. And they're very different. And so maybe we can address each one of them one at a time. Drew, do you have any other, thoughts on how we can kind of break it down and address each one of these items? They're all worthy, but what are we doing in terms of timing? And that's how we need to guide the discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I think, but for not the COVID, probably would you be having these conversations other than adding in a project that we hadn't talked about, right? And that's the one where it's kind of the recent review of things, and maybe there's a simple solution that could exist, overland flow, if we can get the residents to work with us on that.
Right.
All these would have been in the plan anyway. So, again, no, I think if you can take them one by one and maybe the smaller bites are the easiest ones to swallow first.
Right, right. Well,
Barbara, and I guess this is a Barbara, Drew, Jeff question. When we talked about this initially, refresh my memory on we looked at a number of communities who have a tax, and we just mentioned before, what are the typical models on which the tax is based? Yeah, I'm asking that question before we start discussing the merits of all three of these, just to make sure we have a little bit of foundational data. Aaron mentioned lot square footage, for example, as one basis for what this might work, or how this might work. How do other communities calculate or base this process?
Jeff?
Oh, I was gonna.
So most communities establish what they call an equivalent residential unit, an ERU.
Okay.
And, we wouldn't go measure every piece of impervious surface in average residential lots in Lake Bluff. You would generally have a base cost for a typical residential lot. Some communities charge more for extremely large lots or, kind of outliers.
Mm-hmm.
Some communities give credit for places that have their own stormwater pond already. Commercial is typically measured, and then they pay an equivalent of X number of ERUs based on their impervious area. So you kind of establish an average impervious area, call it 1 ERU. You don't measure all the smaller lots. And at some point you start going to more than 1 ERU per property based on size, impact, and the commercial properties generally, you measure them all either using aerial photography or existing records to figure out how much impervious they have and charge them ERUs. Usually, like churches are typically not exempted from a stormwater utility tax, or other nonprofits are typically included. And it's just establishing what that base rate is and what you need to fund projects. I mean, a lot of communities establish their utility. They don't want to wait 10 years of collecting taxes to do anything, so they bond in the first couple of years to do a couple of decent sized projects, and they kind of base their rate on what they need to get a bond to do the projects they want to do.
Okay. And is a process like this self-contained with respect to a board action? There's no like other situations, staff would prepare a proposal for us after a suitable discussion at the finance committee, and then there would be an ordinance and we would approve it, much like we would do for other tax levies and whatnot. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I think the answer is yes, but Peter, I don't know if there's any special procedural requirements in terms of establishing a utility tax that would be extraordinary.
No, I don't. The only thing I would add, not procedural, the only thing I would add is the ordinance itself to enhance the legal authority to impose the stormwater fee. The ordinance would itself create a stormwater utility within the village.
Okay.
And that utility would be funded by the fee.
Okay.
And because there is statutory authority for establishing utilities and operating them, and there's specific case law authority upholding particularly a home rule community's right to establish a stormwater utility and finance it through a fee based on impervious surface.
So it'd be a legal entity, the utility would be.
By ordinance.
Okay. That helps me to understand how we might approach this. Thanks.
I think it's very important to note one thing that Peter said, which is a great follow-up to Mark's question. to make this fair, I mean, because we are talking about imposing a new tax on the people of Lake Bluff, to make this fair is something we have to be very attuned to. And this issue of tying it to impervious surface and ERUs is certainly something that I'd want to make sure we do and do effectively so that it is fair, and that it's applied in a way that that makes a lot of sense.
And I just had a quick question. Once we collect those funds and they go into the utility fund, they can't be transferred out or used for anything else, right? They would just be used for stormwater projects. I don't know if you could answer that.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a legal answer, but I think practically speaking, that would be in control of the board. I don't know if there's a legal prohibition to do so.
Well, I think if you're imposing the fee for stormwater purposes, I think if you start using it for non-stormwater purposes, is it a tax as opposed to a fee? And the reason that's important is there are definitely procedures for imposing a tax, which would kick in and which you would not want to run afoul of. So by making it as a fee, you don't have any of those procedures, but you do have to, it has to be reasonably related to the expenditure of the money has to be reasonably related to the purpose of the fee itself. And I think, Bettina, I assume you would set it up like you do any other enterprise fund.
Yes. And for example, if you were to take out bond debt, you could use that to pay the bond debt.
And I think practically speaking, Trustee Markey, that this, and again, this is all speculative, right? Whether the village would even create the tax, they want to investigate it is like what it sounds like. But the idea, if it were to be created, I think practically speaking, this is not a panacea of income. You know, this is something.
I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
Right. And Regis, I think you had something that you wanted to ask.
Yes, because I'm intently listening all along. But one thing I did not catch is the total amount of cash we would need to do those 3 projects. And one thing I was, and I probably didn't catch that, but there is also a project on the east side that is extremely significant. That is, I believe, in 3 phases, and the first phase is $5 million, I believe. This is not captured by that tax, right? Or is it? And if it is, it could be, I mean, that, I don't know how we would organize a tax to cover for that. That would be very significant. Did I miss something, Barb?
What we talked about in terms of the 3 items that we were discussing, the quick view of it would be research tax / user fee, stormwater fee type funding at $10,000. The second one was the West Terrace Overland.
And then the bath and
right, and then the bath and tennis. So, and the bath and tennis is, I think, 274 or something like that.
And that would not approach any of the projects we talked about that were village-wide?
No. Okay. Not at this moment, no. Yes?
It's the East Terrace Overland flow.
I'm sorry, I said West Terrace. I had written down West Terrace, I'm sorry. And so it sounds like the discussion regarding potential stormwater fees is favorable. So do we have to make a motion then to put that fee back into, you know, it's in the red mode, the stoplight mode currently in the project list for this upcoming year. And so do we want to discuss changing that to a green light project then? It sounds like that's what we're in favor of. Do we need a motion to put that back on?
Well, I think you go through each of the items, and at the end you can do something. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. So then the second item would be the item that is not on the existing project list, the 10-year summary that had the red light, yellow light, green light, but it was the analysis for the East Terrace at about 23,000. That was the proposal that Jeff had given to us. And so let's discuss the relative merits of that.
I just wanted to clarify on that one. We've been talking about that for a while. It's been on the radar. It's not like it just popped up. It's just that we didn't have it on the list for fiscal 21-22, correct? or 2020, yeah, in the next year.
Well, that was a 10-year summary, and Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, was that in the 10-year summary in an out year that I just can't identify?
I don't believe so. We were not talking about running an overland flow path through the East Terrace. We were talking about doing the storm sewer solution of larger pipes.
Mm-hmm.
I think
That was the $5 million project. So
Correct.
That's why it's not on this list, because it's not feasible.
We pared it down.
Yeah.
We're looking at a different way of doing it.
My understanding, this is a relatively new concept that's been introduced in the last month or so to do something for the East Terrace, particularly the Pine Court area, that does not reach, though it is significant, would not reach the $5 million price tag of what we were thinking about before.
Different way to solve the same issues.
Right.
And hopefully it's an actionable project.
Right. Well, it's to chip away at it. We don't know.
Try to
How much?
scale down the cost size, but achieve the same goals.
Right.
And is there any even ballpark on a cost of a project like this?
Well, I like the first number Jeff said to me. I don't know if I can hold him to it. But Jeff, do you remember the number?
No, I don't.
He's conveniently forgotten.
I thought somebody said 500,000. Is that it?
It could be, the study that we're looking at now is not a final engineering number, that 23,000. It's more of a feasibility study. We've got to know if somebody's house is in the way, if, there's a garage that might have to be relocated. It could go, there's a wide range of costs right now because we don't have defined what we'd have to move out of the way. There could be some places where we have to do a pipe for a certain distance and then a ditch for a swale for another distance. And anytime you start burying a pipe of that size, the costs go up in a hurry. So this study hopefully will get us to a point where we have a decent range of cost of the project, and we can take it to the homeowners and say they don't like the flooding. Are you interested in this option?
Right.
If we can move forward with it.
Go ahead, Mark.
No, I was going to say, but it would seem to be, at the end of the day, reachable from the funding from the stormwater levy.
Well, yeah, we don't really know that. What if it ends up being a $2 million project?
I'm just saying, right now, it would seem to be,
right.
And it's potentially a means to an end.
Yes.
And we have to see what we can afford at the end of the day.
Right.
And
I was just because even if we know that if it turns out that's a $2 million project, then at least we have that information. We're not caught wondering,
right.
What if it was only
like
a $100,000 project?
Right.
So,
right. We've got to we have to have facts and data.
I want to know, and if it's, I think that 23,000 or whatever it is a worthy amount to spend on that knowledge.
I agree.
And
Totally agree. Very worthy.
You all said data and information, just so you know, and Jeff, tell me if I'm wrong. This is not necessarily a project that hasn't been considered. I think historically the village has talked about, and this going back to George Russell days as village engineer, I think this has always been out there, but I think the presumption has been that residents would not accept this solution because of an overland flow route, and that but it would appear, given the last 3 years of rain, and that maybe the pendulum is swinging the other way, that people are more accepting to this as a concept, and it can be, certainly can be made more attractive with landscaping and so forth. So there's, I guess, the element of frustration is helping this project to get legs.
And we equate
the fact that a project is better than nothing at all, I think, in most cases.
And we equate number of residences affected, for this particular solution. I mean, how many homes in the East Terrace are experiencing issues that may or may not be solved. I'm trying to just get a big picture of the impact.
Yeah.
Well, there are two streets that regularly close in Rockland and Pine Court, so we have the street impact. I don't know that all the houses flood, but there are at least 7 homes, maybe up to 10, that are having significant problems or have had expressed their frustration with the drainage in that area.
Okay.
One,
Yes.
so I say, well, one homeowner has a very large oak tree in the backyard. It's a beautiful tree, and they said, we're so sick of the flooding. If you take the tree, take the tree. We just don't want to flood anymore. So there was definitely a level of frustration, and
Right.
some of the residents we met showed a real openness to something like this.
Well, I mean, times are changing and situations are always fluid, but it sounds like there may be opportunity now to do things that we did not have the opportunity before. And so it sounds like we've heard from most everyone in terms of their support for including this item. Is that correct? Regis,
Yes.
did I hear from you? Yes?
No, I'm supported. I mean, my main question to you is, from a financial standpoint, is total cost, and how long would these tax go on? If you're raising $500 to $1 million, and would you do that over 5 years, 10 years, and what would be basically the time aspect of that tax?
Right. Well, that was for the issue of the study for the previous project of 10,000. And
but I think we can still have a good sense for it.
And that's what we will hopefully. Yes, Joy?
I just had a quick question for Jeff. When you're looking at the cost for the East Terrace, for what Christopher Burke is doing, one of the items in there for $5,000, the field study says if it's necessary. Do we have any sense of whether or not they will have to do that? I know it seems kind of nitpicky, but it's, like 20% of the cost of the project. Is there a possibility that they could do it without that field survey and save us that money?
That was honestly, I asked them to put that in because I want to make sure that we approach a homeowner that we can tell them, yes, it's going to be, 4 feet away from your home, it's going to look like this. And I didn't feel like without the survey, you could be confident in what we're bringing to a homeowner as far as what their yard's going to look like when we're done. So that is, they want to take contours developed by, the airplane and put on the county website for most of the information we need to kind of run some design through it. But I want to be very certain we know where everybody's window well is, elevation wise. So that was just my thing, to want to make sure that we bring to the homeowners an accurate representation of what we think will happen before we get them to go to the next step.
So we should basically, in my mind, then the 23,000 is what we would be spending for this.
I believe so.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. And I think we've heard from everyone regarding this particular line item, and we're down to the last line item, which is the Boardman Court, the Bath and Tennis storm sewer situation.
I'm sure Jeff could review that project with everybody, kind of a very high level overview again.
Yeah, there's a low spot in Bath and Tennis Club Road, just east of Green Bay Road. It fills up with water from the street and from the backyards between Green Bay Road and Forest Hills, coming from the south, coming from a little ways into the city of Lake Forest. It runs down those backyards.
I'm sorry, Jeff, can I interrupt you? I'm sorry. Do you happen to have a drawing of this so that you can share with the Finance Committee, just if that's something? I think you're at your desk, yes?
I don't know. I can pull one up here in the next couple of minutes. I don't have an exhibit on that.
Okay. Sorry, I thought I'd get lucky.
Sorry. Essentially, the water overflows the street and goes in the yards of homes on Boardman Court and floods a home on Boardman Court. And this project would divert that water east down Bath and Tennis Club Road towards the wetland just east of Wimbledon Court, and reduce the flooding of the street and of the home on Boardman Court.
Drew, I guess I'm confused about the number of homes and number of individuals who have contacted the village, because at first it seemed like, well, this is one person in one home. And then we heard from other neighbors and said, oh no, it affects us too. Do you have a sense for the number of homes that are affected, the number of streets that are affected. I'm trying to just weigh the impact because I don't believe it's just one person, one home.
Well, Jeff, I'd ask you to answer that question with regards to what the modeling has told us under the current, or I guess the new 10-year, 100-year events, and then what you've seen or heard anecdotally and through some of the recent communications.
Excuse me, could I interrupt? I'm looking at a Google map here, and you can get if Jeff could even pop up. I don't know if you could need to do a screen capture or whatever, but I think this would really support answering the fundamental question that Barbara's asking, because you can kind of follow the contour down here and see where it empties into the homeowner in question.
Well, I know.
I could share a map. It's hard to.
Can you get to the county website, Jeff?
I'm looking at our storm sewer map has contours on it. If I
Okay.
can share my screen, I will.
Glenn, can you make that so?
It is already so.
All right. So is that visible?
Not yet.
No.
You're getting there, I think.
All right. It says it's sharing.
There we go.
There you go.
Yep.
So this lovely map is our storm sewer map. And if you see my cursor over here,
Mm-hmm.
is the dip in Bath and Tennis Club Road we were talking about. A little bit. Water comes from all of these backyards flowing north, and also flows down the street from both directions, and it puddles here. This street has a very low curb on the side, and then directly at the back of the curb, it dumps down. So it doesn't pond in the street any more than the top of the curb. It immediately goes down to this area, runs around this house, and tries to go into this storm sewer system, and it floods. So you talk about the other homeowners involved. This homeowner here flooded in July of 2017.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't produced a model that says that they flood over their window wells in a 100-year storm, but this house we have. So this house is the one that's flooded the most on Boardman Court. The other neighbor is this one. I think there's one more neighbor. I don't know where the third person is that contacted us, but it's these two homes that took water in 2017. Our modeling shows this house flooding during a 100-year storm now, and if we do our project, it will not flood. We're talking about replacing this, or adding another storm sewer from here down to about here. And then letting that water will end up back on the street and then into the wetland preserve.
So we would add a line rather than increase the existing line.
That is the plan right now. We might be able to abandon the existing line in the future, but there are some other connections in here that would be much more costly to run them across the street and put them in the new line. And we can't follow the existing alignment because of conflict with other utilities. Try to keep the cost down. It's parallel, which is not ideal at all, but that's where we're trying to keep the cost down as much as possible.
Okay.
Jeff, I have a question, and it stems from our previous conversation. Has there been any sort of above ground study for this area, or is an underground pipe the only solution?
In this case, so this home right here is in the bowl. So all of this elevation here is higher. So we talk about the East Terrace. There's a way to divert water before it ponds so high that it goes in homes. In this case, it can't because this home elevation is so low. You look back at the original plans for this subdivision on Boardman Court. Now the current owners didn't build this house, but somehow that house got built 3 feet lower than what was planned. All this water here was supposed to flow right down this lot line and into the railroad track right away, which would have been perfect. But for some reason in the 1980s, this house got built lower. So now instead of water going down the lot line, it forms a moat all the way around this house. You see this 695 contour. That just fills up, and then water tries to go in this pipe, which is not sufficiently sized to keep water out of the home.
And there's no berm or anything that we could do instead that would make that diversion?
We talked to the railroad at one point after 2017 because it's still physically possible to run a swale down this lot line and dump it in the railroad right away. And he basically said, you can ask, but you're going to get told no. I think, Drew, you were part of that conversation.
Yeah.
Our friend.
And basically don't bother asking. Yeah.
No, I think they were going to charge us a few $1,000s to ask them to be told no. I remember that conversation then.
Well, I think it was more than, it was like a $5,000 application. And
Yeah. So we chose not to pursue that.
Okay.
So is it true to say then we've got one homeowner who is the worst afflicted by this situation, but there are two other homeowners that have significant yard flooding? Because it's one thing to have a model and to use it for predictive purposes and to try to spend our dollars in the best way. That's perfect. That's what we want to do. But I don't have a good grip on actual people who have said I've experienced actual burdensome property threatening damage. And if they say there's a flood in their yard and the model doesn't show it, but you can walk out and see the flood in their yard, I just want to know, not the theoretical, but what are the actual people who have said I'm actually experiencing
Yeah, so this house has gotten water more than once. This house up here has gotten water, I believe, just once, the big storm of July 2017. The yards flood often and they hold water. We don't necessarily recommend projects just based on somebody's yard holding water. We try to follow our criteria of keeping the streets open and water out of the homes during the 100-year storm. So that wouldn't by itself, just having the moat around the home, trigger us recommending a project to be done. It's the fact that this home floods. But it is, as far as I know, in a normal 100-year storm, it is just the one home that floods.
But we have two homes that have flooded. So again, I'm just trying to isolate between the theoretical and the actual.
Yeah. The storm of July 2017 was in excess of a 100-year storm.
Right.
So we don't necessarily.
But didn't they change the metrics? So it right now it would still be, I don't know. How
they changed the metrics. It's hard to say sometimes because the kind of flooding we look at is it goes over your window well. Well, sometimes when it's raining in the middle of the night, did it go over your window well? Did it go around the window well? There's different ways that water gets into your home. And it's hard to say for sure which one is what happened. But
right.
I know that house took water. I'm not exactly certain how it took water. Our models don't show it taking water during a 100-year storm, even with the new 100-year storm.
Okay.
Jeff, did the house to the north, the house that's the house to the north, did that house? No, I'm sorry, the other house. Yep, right there. Did that house actually flood, or did it just take water to the front?
That I'm not sure. They had water in their basement. I have never been exactly clear on how it got there.
Okay.
Okay, any further discussion on the merits of this
I guess
potential?
I don't know if anybody has an answer to this question, but has this house always flooded, or has this just been a new thing in the last couple of years? I mean, it was built in the 80s, you say. Has it flooded ever since it was built, as far as we know?
I believe they said it flooded once before. I started working with the village in 2015. I thought they said it had flooded once before then, and 3 times or more since in the last 5 years. One of the issues with this house in particular is as the water spills down this hill, trying to make that water make a turn in one direction or the other is hard. So it ends up against the foundation of the home and kind of washing the dirt away. And I think sometimes water gets in that way. But as far as over the window well, we know that's happened at least once.
If the house was supposed to have been built 3 feet higher, who approved the 3 feet lower construction.
Yeah, that was pre-George Russell, so I do not know what we had for building review at that time.
Is there,
What you
Jeff,
said was built in the 80s?
I believe it was in the 80s, yes.
so I'm looking at the lines, the 700 line and the 695 line, and discussing the same subject on East Terrace, now West Terrace. Would it be possible to have an overland flow of water as well in between these two elevation lines, so the 700 and the 695, by basically lowering the grade of the terrain? Could you do that?
Again, the only way to do that would be to run it up here towards the railroad, because the
Yeah,
railroad's
that's
down
what I'm looking at.
90. Trying to run it this way, these elevations, I think the lowest elevation on Boardman Court is right about here. And it is almost exactly the same elevation as where water gets into the home. So right as this water starts spilling this way, and we don't have, we looked at it too, maybe we could lower this, but we don't have an easement back here. And I think that'd be very difficult to obtain because you'd essentially be running right through the middle of these yards. But that was another option that we tried to explore, was there a way to get water to come this way before it got into the home? And it didn't seem workable given that these people aren't having the problem, and it would essentially go right through the middle of their backyard.
And running a pipe through their underground pipe through their backyard wasn't feasible either. Because that, to me, that seems like a smaller
Running
an
underground pipe from here, we looked at trying to come through here. Essentially, the distance we're doing here is similar, and it's all in the right of way, so it wouldn't require any easements or any private property impact, and it should be a similar cost.
And the outflow ends up in the same spot, correct?
It all ends up back here. And the other point there is we're trying to keep the road from taking on water in a 10-year storm too, which is the other criteria that we have that we're trying to meet, is to drain the road better. And that's why I think it was preferable to try to pick it up here.
Yeah, and draining the road better gives more benefit to others than just this one house, I suppose, is a point to point out.
I just want to point out too that I pulled the letter up from the homeowner just north of the Whites there, and they say in their letter that their basement has never flooded. So I think the only house taking water would be the Whites house. And it seems like a lot of water they're taking.
So right now we have the project list with this project as a red lighted item. And so the discussion is, do we want to look at taking that transfer back over to the general fund to put this back in the category of a green lighted project?
How long has this project been on our capital improvement list?
Well, 2017 is when the family first came to us with the issues.
Yeah.
And
So
at that point, we authorized a study
Mm-hmm.
to assess what the options might be.
Mm-hmm. They were told this is complex, this is expensive, we've got to look at it, and so they've been waiting. This will be year 4 for a resolution, and this was outlined as an item to put in the budget, and then got put as a red lighted item when the projection of revenues came in due to COVID-19.
Right.
So do we have a consensus as far as how we feel about putting this back in the budget and giving it a green light?
So I just want to make a comment that I don't want to make a habit of doing this scale projects to help one homeowner. I would be a lot more eager to green light it if it helped, half a dozen or, whatever, just more than one home that probably should not have been built the way it was in the first place. And we're kind of, I don't want to say bailing out the builder and the current homeowner, but that's kind of what it is for something that probably should not have been built the way it was. Having said that, we have contemplated this project for 3 years, and we did approve it at one point. So I think if we can figure out a way to fund it, in this case, I'd be willing to go ahead with it.
And Barbara, this is Bill. I'm certainly with Aaron on this point of the concern about something that benefits just one home that was built, it appears, contrary to what the proper plan should have been. That being said, I'd certainly like to find some path to relief to the situation. I drove it a couple of days ago, looked at it, and I can certainly see how the effects can be dramatic. I suppose one question we haven't asked, and I don't want to extend this discussion on necessarily, we're at 6:57, but I suppose I would ask the question of what contribution could this homeowner make? Because obviously they have a significant economic interest in solving this problem. And even if they were to share some portion of this $270,000 burden, which is significant, that might be a worthy thing for us to address or approach.
Well, we have not discussed any contribution on the part of the resident prior to this, and I guess I would defer to Drew to see if this is something that, you know, do we have precedent for that and other projects in the village, and what might that look like? Or is that something we just can't, you know, it's 2 minutes to the end of the meeting. We can't just put something like that out there and then
No, we could continue the conversation if we don't have all the information that we need. And I would also like to have that information as well. So if we need a special finance committee meeting after tonight in order to do it, I would certainly like to explore that.
Okay.
I agree with Aaron. I mean, I'd like to help the people who have this problem, but we have to find the right path that makes sense and is fair for everybody.
All right, then. So, Drew, is it possible that we could direct staff to do a little bit of research in how this might be organized and funded?
Sure. Yes.
Great. All right.
Just Chair Anchorman, just so you know, I believe while they haven't raised their hand, I believe the Whites have been on this call. I don't know if they have something to say, given we're coming towards the tail end. And if they wanted to say something, I think now would be a good time before we get to the point where you're looking for a motion to continue this conversation.
Okay, my apologies. I didn't think to ask.
No.
So, Glenn, do we have their willingness to say something? And
Yes, we do, Ms. Chairperson.
thank you.
Madam Chairperson. Jeff White, you are on and live whenever you're ready to talk.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know if we really have anything to put in towards it. I mean, when our basement took that 3 feet of water 3 years ago, it cost us about $70,000. That pretty much exhausted everything we had. This is just, it's an ongoing thing. If you still have the map up showing, the water that's coming down is coming down from 4 houses on Green Bay, 4 houses on Forest Hills. So essentially we're taking water in 8 acres off 8 acres, plus some water seems to be coming in additionally, we found out, through Lake Forest. There's a homeowner right on the edge of town that put in a new back road, blacktop road. Since that has happened, the neighbors up there have told me they get an incredible amount of water, and they're the ones on Green Bay. They've told me their backyard actually freezes. There's so much water in the kids' ice skate. If you go down below them on Forest Hills back in the corner, there's an elderly couple who told me that their sump pumps run pretty much 24/7 now, and they can't figure out where the water's going. You probably got the letter from the Gallaghers to my north.
They haven't had water yet, I believe, in their basement, but they take up to 3 feet of water throughout their yard as well. Some of the pictures you could see of all their bark going down the pipes, running up my driveway into my garage. I mean, it's a lot of water coming down. Every time we do get these, rains, 1, 2, 3 inches, it is a moat around our house. And we're running downstairs, carrying all our belongings up to the first story, hoping it isn't going to come in. I've actually had to go buy a pump to see if we can try to keep the water out.
I have a question. How deep is the moat and how long does it, what's the longest that has been sustained in the yard?
In the front yard, between us and the Gallaghers, it gets to probably about 5 feet deep over by the pipe.
Mm-hmm.
We flooded 3 years ago. There was probably close to a foot of water.
We couldn't get our cars out.
We couldn't get the cars out of the driveway.
Mm-hmm.
Because we just sit so low, there's just nowhere for the water to go. And the pipes that we have that run it down to the wetlands, they can control our water that we take from our property, the ones above us, and the Gallaghers. But when you're talking all this water that's coming off those 12 acres plus Lake Forest over Bath and Tennis and then dropping into my yard, that's a lot of water.
Well, thank you for sharing that additional information. And
and to answer your question about the runoff, it probably takes a couple hours for that moat to finally drain out once it stops raining.
So even when it's raining, we have to wait for that water.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions for the Whites? Okay. Well, Drew, can I ask staff to do a little bit of research and then we can continue this discussion at the next yet to be determined Finance Committee meeting?
Sure.
Thank you.
Should we move on the other 2 issues right now to resolve them?
I think so. So we had 3 items to discuss. We're going to continue our discussion on the Bath and Tennis project, but the first item was the $10,000 village-wide assessment of stormwater funding. Do we have agreement to fund this?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
That's a roll call.
Okay.
Chair Ankerman,
Aye.
Member Meyer,
Aye.
Member Toll,
Aye.
Thank you. And then on the second item, which is not on the existing project list, but the $23,000 to fund the overland route research for the East Terrace flooding issue,
$23,100.
$23,100. Do we have a motion?
Yes. Motion.
Second.
We have a roll call, please.
yes. Chair Ankerman,
Aye.
Member Meyer,
Aye.
Member Toll,
Aye.
Thank you.
And just to be clear on the next steps with that the 23,100 will appear as a board action item at the next regularly scheduled board meeting. That engagement exceeds my authority, and then the 10,000, we can talk to council whether we rope that in as part of and do it all at once. But either way, we'll get it done.
The next board meeting. Thank
Yep.
you. Are there any other informational items or staff report to include because we're over our time limit?
The only thing I would offer is a quick update on the stimulus grant program that the village put together for sales tax generators. Given we've only had 2 applicants and 2 grant checks awarded so far, so we were going to send a letter out to all the businesses that we thought potentially qualified and send them a letter just to remind them that this program's available to them. So maybe
Great.
shake the bushes a little there.
All right.
How much have we expended?
Less than 3,000, Bettina.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say about 2,500.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Great. Thank you. So at this time, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call for adjournment.
Chair Ankerman,
Aye.
Member Meyer,
Aye.
Member Toll,
Aye.